Well, hi everyone. Welcome to another live session. Welcome to Oscar's Green Card. We are happy to be here, joined by Evan Law from Manifest Law. Evan, how are you?
Great. It's good to be with you again.
Yeah, again, second time, and I think we're going to see each other more frequently from now on. So this is going to be a little bit of a different session because we're going to cover a review for an EB2 NIW real case from one of our course members. And then we'll move to our traditional Q&A. Remember that our typical disclaimer from the intro, Marina and I are not US lawyers. Evan is a lawyer, but this session is above all informative, and it doesn't bind you with Evan in any legal way. We're doing this to motivate people to understand the category and to really give you more tools to pursue that EB2 NIW green card route. This video is sponsored by Manifest, and just a little bit about Manifest. Manifest is what they call a new kind of law firm. They say that it is one that puts both the client and the lawyer's best interest at heart, and Manifest was built to fix everything that countless immigrants need in their journey: transparency, accountability, and human experience. They are a law firm that has gone through a lot of engagement online. We are seeing them everywhere, including this channel, and we are going to welcome them every time here because they can provide more insights, even for do-it-yourself petitioners, no matter if you are do-it-yourself or you're hoping to do this with a lawyer. Later, I'll tell you a little bit about a discount that they are offering to our audience, and that will be after we cover our first part of this session, which is reviewing one real case and getting feedback. And to do that, we actually have the person that is behind that case, which is Dominic. Welcome to the stage. How are you?
Hey, Oscar, thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, of course. And Dominic is our course member. And just a few days ago, we requested some volunteers to do this session together, and he provided the insights for his case. So, Dominic, we are going to put them on screen right now. Let's see if we can see them like that a little bit better. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you professionally? And then maybe you can tell us a little bit of what you're thinking about for your proposed endeavor.
Okay, sure. So my name is Dominic, as you already mentioned. I originally born in Ghana, so I'm a Ghanaian by nativity. I'm a digital marketing professional, and I've had over 6 years of progressive experience after I graduated. I had a degree in engineering. I was a college engineering major, but then from there I had the opportunity to pursue digital marketing. So I stayed in that industry for over 6 years. And my proposed endeavor is to essentially harness my digital marketing expertise, specifically in the area of AI integrated digital marketing, to help small and medium-sized enterprises in the United States to essentially adopt and effectively utilize advanced digital marketing technologies, specifically with regards to AI-driven campaign optimization and also intelligent customer targeting tools. And the goal is to help them to, number one, reduce wasted advertising investment or marketing investment, and also number two, help them enhance their capability for revenue generation and operational efficiency. The overall goal is to essentially help the SMEs in the United States to along the goals of economic competitiveness and innovation. So essentially, that's what my proposed endeavor is about.
So it's not really a researcher endeavor, it's not a scientist. That a lot of people are always maybe more back in the day, people were like, oh, I'm not a scientist, I cannot apply. So that's not exactly the case. We know that you are one of those cases that is a more traditional, maybe private company employee kind of endeavor. So Evan, now is your turn to give, of course, this is not going to be a super in-depth evaluation, but what is your feeling about this? What components do you like about this case, or what things you want to ask him also maybe about what he has under his belt?
Sure. Well, Dominic, you started off very well explaining this progressive experience you have. Just for the audience, we want to let everyone know that with a bachelor's
For some
degree,
reason, I can't hear Evan.
and 5 years of experience. So it sounds like Dominic's not hearing me. Oscar, are you able to hear?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Let's see.
Okay, you can continue, Dominic.
Okay.
You're muted, but we can continue.
Okay, so essentially, you've laid out that you have the bachelor's degree plus
Yeah, I
more
can
than
hear
5 years of progressive experience. So I'm not sure how we fix the audio because to have this, we will need to have the interaction here with Dom.
Yes,
Questions.
Dominic, what you can do, you can, if you have the YouTube open, maybe you can turn on the audio of YouTube, but you have to be muted, otherwise we'll have echo. Okay.
Okay, so we'll try that. In a moment, I'll ask you a couple of questions, Dominic, once you give us a thumbs up that you can hear me. But essentially, this is a unique proposed endeavor in that, as we all know, AI has just been revolutionary, and there's certainly a lot of interesting components to this with the proposed endeavor. One of the things that's challenging with a proposed endeavor and trying to meet this national importance requirement is that we want it to be big enough, but not too big. And I'll clarify that by basically saying we need the officer to basically have a solid understanding of what you're targeting and what will be the results from your endeavor. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? So here in this case, the focus appears to be the fact that these small and medium enterprises are either spending a lot of money in advertising or their marketing campaigns aren't reaching the levels that they need them to. So Dominic, can you hear me now? You getting this? Okay, so the first questions I'd like to propose to you is what problem have you noticed? Where did you first get the idea of this to kind of help understand how we can narrow your scope? Are you still able to hear, Dominic?
I wonder if he's hearing with delay. That's.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So essentially, my idea came from when I investigated the small and medium-sized enterprises, particularly in the United States. I noticed that one of the biggest challenges has to do with a lot of billions of dollars that go into marketing and advertising investment that essentially could be, properly managed and optimized for efficiency when artificial intelligence is introduced for marketing campaigns. So that was essentially where I got that first idea, and the goal or the angle I was approaching this from was to essentially along the lines of competitiveness and innovation in the in the business industry, specifically for SMEs. And the other side was also on the side of essentially revenue generation, because one of the biggest things in the especially in business is the ability to generate revenue, and the way that is impacted by my proposed endeavor is that when it comes to the customer intelligent customer targeting tools, or the methodology that I'm proposing, essentially what happens is that once that is implemented, or from what I've seen so far in the companies that I've worked with, is that there is the better capability, or the ability to generate revenue at a much higher rate is improved, with the intelligent customer targeting tools. And so those are the two major things that and that is where my two projects come in. So the two critical AI projects, essentially the first one had to do with, helping using AI to help small SMEs to essentially become more efficient in spending their marketing or advertising investment. And the second component, or the second project, has to do with helping the SMEs to improve their customer targeting capabilities, and both of which has delivered results in previous companies that I've worked with. So essentially, that is the whole goal, to generally improve the competitiveness in the SME sector in the United States.
Okay, excellent. So I do have just a couple of kind of follow-up questions, or even some kind of insights on this. And I'm bringing this perspective of just from my time working at the Administrative Appeals Office as an adjudicator for cases like this. So one of the thoughts that you want to be aware of is you want to be sure that the officer is not going to have a thought of, okay, I see what your proposed endeavor is, but on the one hand, is your endeavor going to be essentially negatively impacting those marketing businesses that are already established, right? And so you want to view this as, you want to be careful in that you establish what you're trying to improve, but to do it in a way that says that that shows that it's not going to negatively impact other businesses. And so what I would suggest is that you really look for reports and documentation about how you can make these SMEs much more efficient and to focus on their growth rather than trying to have this complete reduction of the cost that they're spending. Because if they reduce their costs, that means they're not pumping money into the economy that could affect others in the marketing world. Does that make sense? So, and I guess with the delay, maybe I shouldn't do a lot of back and forth with that. But so that's one point I would make.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. The other thing I would suggest is when we look over at the right of this slide, and we have the language here, one, promote economic growth and competitiveness. What I would do to focus there is really provide reports about just how much the economy relies on these small and medium enterprises, and how many people they are employing, and how much that growth can have a wide impact as that grows. The next thing I would say is on the item 2, where it says advanced digital equity and inclusion for American SMEs. This part about inclusion for them. So this is where language like this can give the officer a little bit reason to pause and say, I'm not really sure what they mean by that. Oftentimes when you see inclusion, you're thinking of things like accessibility and things like that. So what I would suggest, we want to be very concrete in our language. And so this is going back to my earlier comment. You basically want to narrow your proposed endeavor and be concise enough so that the officer knows exactly what your meaning of what you're trying to advance. So when you say advanced digital equity, I would just rephrase this probably to just be more specific about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Now, the other thing I would note is with your bachelor's degree being in biomedical engineering, I do think it would be helpful for you to get some support letters that, and you'll do this, I'm sure, because your past experience has been in the progressive field of marketing. But it would be helpful to also get some support letters where people can discuss how your past experience, your education, also very well prepared you for this going forward. We just want to make sure all the dots are connected, because part of the case, as you know, is you have to show you're well positioned to carry out the endeavor. Because this is on your resume, that's one of the first things the officer will say is, okay, wait a second, but he has a degree in biomedical engineering. It's not readily apparent that you have the 6 years of experience. So I would even suggest perhaps restructuring your resume a little bit. I mean, education is usually at the top, so I would just work with that in a way that perhaps at the top of your experience you can describe or show very, very concretely that you have the 6 years of experience.
And
okay,
Evan,
so those are my thoughts there. Go ahead, Oscar.
And I have a question. So this candidate for EB2 NIW, mostly what has to show is similar projects probably in his area related to that proposed endeavor. So any tip on what kind of evidence, how do you substantiate, and do you down select the projects that you're going to show in that pro number 2? How do you pick those projects, and what evidence ideally you would like to see there?
Yeah, oftentimes what I say to people in discussing resumes overall is think about this in terms of being like a job application. Oftentimes, so when you go into a particular job that you're applying for, if you have experience on there that's really not relevant to that, it's best to leave it off, right? And so with something like this, I would suggest a similar thing. Pick your most important projects that go directly to demonstrating that you will be able to carry this out. You want basically the conversation in the officer's mind to go kind of like what an employer would say. Oh, I see you've done this on your resume. We would really love you to do that for our company, right? And so in the same way, we want the officer to say, okay, wow, he's done this for these other companies, these other projects. That demonstrates he is well positioned to carry this out because he's already done these types of things. And so the more you can make that very clear, you're basically kind of setting the stage or building the foundation for the proposed endeavor discussion, because the officer will be weighing out both of these at kind of at the same time.
Yeah, makes sense. And Dominic, I know the sound is getting with some delay, so if you have any specific question before we wrap up, please, now is your time.
Yeah, thank you. So my only question would be with regards to essentially what, first of all, thank you, Evan, for that insights. My question has to do with the demonstration of national importance. You mentioned the fact that I could try getting the documentations and the reports that kind of substantiates my, like the area that I'm proposing to accomplish my projects for the SME. So I was just kind of wondering, like, what if as a former expert or a former immigration officer, like how would you, or what would you have been looking for if I was presenting that report specifically to support my proposed endeavor? Was there any particular, are there any, like, would you be looking like the numbers or any statistics, or is there something definitively that you'd be looking for? Because I just want to make sure that I just present the policies, but also like if there's any particular component in those documents that I should be targeting to be included in my arguments, I think that would be very helpful.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and great points. And really, you bring up a very good point, because the national importance is it can be the hardest part of these cases to meet. What I would suggest is, and there's not one way to do these, but what I would suggest is look for reports about medium-sized companies, small and medium-sized companies where you have real dialogue going on, where people are talking about just how they don't know how to take that next step to scale their business for the marketing aspects of things. They could be talking about, we don't have the budget like Amazon and these other and Google and these major companies that can put out a lot of content and market their new ideas and things that comes out. So the more that you can basically provide documentation that shows objectively what is the the real problem. In other words, we want to see the problem, not just have to. I'm speaking as I'm a USCIS officer. We want to basically see the problem objectively, rather than just have to trust that what you're saying is that there's a problem out there. We just need to trust you that you'll find it and make it happen. So it's really good to have this documentation showing how you've helped other businesses in those ways. That goes very well towards showing you're well positioned to carry this out. What I'd like to see is as much evidence as you can provide as where the need is. The more you can show that, the better you have the chance of showing what your remedy is. So at times you may hear the phrase that it's easier to sell pain pills than vitamins, right? Vitamins are this kind of preventive measure, right? The pain point, that's really what comes out in businesses a lot of time. Where is the pain point? And so you kind of view this, just going back to my example about the resume, and you're applying for this position, as though the job is, what can you do nationally for the United States? Now, what I would suggest is, when I say you want to be careful about the scope, I wouldn't suggest you try to go all in and say, we're going to provide this to all small and medium-sized businesses, right? And so if there are some ways that you can even find connections between, or similarities between the companies that you have done this work for, and then find where those needs are, that will be helpful. So in essence, the question here is the most difficult one to answer, and really it involves a lot of kind of digging on your part to see, what can I present that shows this objectively why there's a need here. Now, the other thing I would just have you keep in mind is, the officer's also thinking is, why do we want to waive the labor certification process here? Why is this a need that is so much more important, or much more urgent, that we need Dominic's work to be able to advance this field? You may consider looking at the fact that with just the development of AI right now, the fear I would have is that a lot of these businesses would be left behind by the businesses that really can invest and understand how to use AI effectively. And so if you're able to show that you can provide a benefit so that those companies do not get left behind, I mean, that's one avenue to explore. And I would just suggest you kind of consider different aspects of the case like that. Does that make sense? So do you have any follow-up questions on that? This is a multifaceted part of the puzzle, and I would suggest
makes so
you
much sense. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Perfect. So yeah, I think we touched a little bit on it. Of course, this is not a full case review. We have limited time, but I think this was interesting, probably, hopefully, both for Dominique and for the rest of the audience. So Dominique, thank you so much for volunteering. Good luck with the rest of your process, and we'll see you around in the course also. So thank you.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you, Evan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for being here.
And we're going to go to Q&A in a second, but first let me do our typical break to tell people about our resources. No matter if you are a do-it-yourself petitioner or if you are thinking about hiring an attorney, there's two main routes for you. Do it yourself, you prepare it yourself without a lawyer, or finding a good attorney and let the attorney handle your filing. Those are the two avenues that everyone has. And for do-it-yourself petitioners, of course, I'm biased. I'm going to tell you, go to oscarsgreencard.com, because we have plenty of resources there, including our online courses, which modules that are organized by the step of the process, with video lessons in English, with subtitles in Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, and Chinese. And you can submit questions in each lesson. And on top of that, for NIW, we do a live video once a month. And we have a variety of courses, introduction to the two main categories in NIW and EB1A. Then we have two full courses on each of those categories. And then we have one special course for RFE in EB2 and NIW, which unfortunately became a little bit too popular lately because the adjudication standards have tightened a little bit. And then if you are thinking about the second route, if you don't want to do it yourself, well, today we have an example of a good lawyer with us, Evan Law, and Manifest Law, his firm is providing a discount for the people who are watching our channel. So if you want to get a chance to get that $500 discount, click on the link that you have in the description of this video, or type it, and you have it on the screen, or scan that QR code, and you can access the Manifest Law portal, request your free consultation, and if you engage with them and you sign with them, then you can claim that $500 discount. This is valid for a variety of visas. EB2 NIW is the topic of today, but of course, for example, Evan, I think your specialty is EB1A. I think that's where you're really, really strong. So Manifest does EB1As, O1s. I think they deal with pretty much all the alphabet of green cards and visas. So now we're going to go to Q&A, and I already see some questions for Evan in the chat. We're going to go through them, but first let's get into the intro. All right, so we're back, and now with the second half of the session, where we listen to you who are on the other side of the screen. So you can type your comments on the chat. It's free. You only have to be a subscriber for 1 minute, so it's very easy to comply with that, and hopefully most of you are subscribers anyway. And let's start with the first question. If Marina, if you have one selected already.
The first two questions are about the ban of last week. Jemmy says, hi, I'm from Honduras, but a permanent resident in Colombia. Could this ban affect my case? And what happens with my husband, who is a Colombian citizen, and my dependent in this application?
Okay, so first of all, what I'll say is this ban is a temporary effort to basically ensure that people coming to the United States getting their green card, their permanent residency, that they will be able to financially support themselves. And so, and I'll have to go back down the list. I don't remember all the countries that are on there, but if anyone who is affected by this, that their country is on that list, basically their processing overseas is being paused right now. So what that means, it's a lengthy process, as you know as well. So I would suggest you just continue to get everything else in order, make sure all the forms are filled out online through the State Department website, make sure all the affidavit of support documentation is there. And so I would just recognize that this will pass. This is kind of a storm overhead that I feel like will move. But instead of overly worrying about what's outside of your control, I would suggest taking these steps to be proactive.
Yeah, and this really, to follow up on the question, this really is an individual issue, right? So if you are, and like you said, hopefully this will be resolved soon, and so this person doesn't even have to worry when the time comes. But if you are a spouse of an applicant, one could be affected and the other one maybe not, right? It really they look at you not as a family unit, right?
Yeah, it really depends on if you are coming over as a dependent. So like the child who's attached to the father's case, in that case, that will be paused as well. But right. If you have an independent basis to come to the U.S. and get your green card, and you're not on the list, then that will be fine. And so that's why even some people with dual nationalities can avoid this in some ways.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a question later. I already saw that question in the chat, so we'll get to it in a second. But okay. Marina put this one here on the screen, and it reads, what do you foresee, for how long will, people love to ask for predictions, how long will this suspension of 75 countries last? For example, for Latin America. I understand you are not a fortune teller.
Yeah, it's a great question because it is impacting people's lives, and we certainly hope that this doesn't last very long. If you look back into the times that there were other travel bans from the Trump administration the first time around, it did take a few months for those things to be sorted out. There were lawsuits that were filed and things like that. So I would suggest, when I give time frames and I say it shouldn't be that long, a short time frame, in my view, just knowing the world of immigration processing, I would say, 3 to 5 months is kind of on that short time frame. I'd hope it gets resolved sooner than that. But we'll have to see what plays out in litigation.
Right. And theoretically, they are doing this to improve the public charge scrutiny, right? So theoretically, they are supposed to be working to put in place some additional measures. That's what's behind all of this. So that takes some time. It will not be immediate, but we hope that they do it fast.
Right. Yeah. And so, as you know, there are a lot of things taking place right now, just in the news in general.
There are too many things
going
on.
So we don't know what will come next or how long this will last. But essentially, what this means is you really should be taking proactive steps to be ready to go as soon as the way is cleared that you can move forward.
Okay. Yep.
So the next question is from Ali. My projects have a media coverage, but my name is not mentioned. Should I mention about that, or how can I represent it?
Yes, this is always a good question to bring up, because my view is it's always better to mention it, especially if you can provide documentation that connects the dots. It's really hard to find the perfect evidence out there to submit. And so, for example, sometimes you might be interviewed in thinking that you're going to get a great article published about you, but they don't end up including all the details that you thought would be in there, right? Well, so at that point, you want to look at what ways can you look at other pieces of evidence. For example, if before you went on the show, they sent you an email talking about your accolades and things like that. This is something that, it's not as strong as if the article discussed you in particular, but it conveys that you are well qualified to advance your endeavor. And so anything that you have that basically showcases why you're well qualified to carry out your endeavor, I would suggest putting that in. But the other thing I would have you keep in mind is you also don't want to have the officer needing to piece everything together on their own. And so if you do that, you really need to highlight the things and point out in bold lettering how that connects to you, and make the job easier for the officer to see those points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we have a few more questions about the pause. Maybe we'll have a couple of them later, but just to switch it up and make this a little bit more engaging. Here is a question about an RFE. It says, I am a tenure track assistant professor, but doesn't have many citations. I filed my case before, and I now have more papers and citations. I got an RFE. To what extent I can use them as evidence? I guess this is because we typically say you cannot include new evidence that was produced after the priority date. So how do you deal with this? Because especially citations keep growing. I'm inclined to show them. If it was me, I would be inclined to show them because I have them, and why not? I don't think it's going to hurt you. But what's your take on this kind of situation?
Yeah, I have a similar view on that, and here's a little bit of a nuance to describing the differences between EB1 cases and EB2 NIW. So EB1s, that would be something that you can submit because you have to show that you're continuing to work in the field and that you have sustained a claim in the field. And so that's kind of an ongoing, continuous thing. With this, the officer, it's a little more of a nuance there because USCIS has language that says you have to show eligibility as of the date of filing, right? And so because of that, the officers might be guarded to ensure that everything you've submitted is there. But I'm in line with what Oscar said. You're trying to paint the picture here for the officer that shows you're well positioned to carry this out. And so the officer is not going to go down all the list of, look at everyone who cited all your work and said, wait a minute, they cited their work on this date. This citation was this date. And so instead of the 30 citations we thought they had, he or she probably only has 20. They won't take that analysis, but at least they should. And I would say maybe some officers might go to those lengths, but still, this is kind of also referencing the fact that officers can Google you. And so when they pull you up, if they look at your Google Scholar page, what are they going to see? It's there. So I would just view this as, you want to put yourself in the best light you can. And so, yes, provide those details that you can. Now, the flip side of that is also you can look for other evidence in responding to an RFE that perhaps somebody who knows about your work and the citations that you have continued to receive, perhaps you could reach out to them and ask for a letter of recommendation. That's a new piece of evidence. It wasn't necessarily something that they would say, well, wait a second, that wasn't available before, just because you didn't reach out to them. So I would say that's a way that you could kind of add value to this issue.
Yeah, and actually for publications, I could see them as more like, yeah, this is a new evidence, but citations is something that, I don't know, in my opinion, is like a little bit different. People are citing your work. You're not actively doing anything, really. The work was already there before the priority date. So I don't know.
Yep.
This is just a thought.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So next question.
Yes, the next one is from Max. How does the premium processing request impact the possibility to get an RFE?
Okay, this is a good question, and I will probably say I might answer this one way in the morning and a different way in the afternoon. It just, the fact is, premium processing does put these officers under significant time constraint. And so if the officers are going to see an issue that they are confused about or that they feel like warrants an RFE, they're likely going to do that. And they're because of the time constraints, sometimes it feels like the officers do that to buy themselves time a bit, and there is some truth to that. But I would also say what's difficult in answering this is we just don't know if that same officer would have also issued you an RFE in regular processing, right? And I would think that they just get used to looking for where are the weaker parts of the case, where are the things that I'm unclear about, and those things they focus in on, whether it's under premium processing or regular processing. And so, in other words, oftentimes I think this question is coming from a concern of, am I going to be at more risk of receiving an RFE if I go for premium processing? It's hard to say. I would just try to do your best to avoid an RFE in any way you can. But the fact is nowadays we're getting so many RFEs that you might just be best to recognize whether it's premium processing or regular processing, you're likely to get an RFE and kind of just move forward that way. Whether you, for example, if you have 2 letters of support that really highlight very similar things, you may want to hold on to one, and maybe you can use that for responding to an RFE. It's just hard to say because you also want to put your best evidence forward as well. So good luck. That's kind of one of those $1 million questions we're trying.
And it's a question that we get all the time. In fact, there's another question on the chat about that, and it's the never-ending question that we have gotten for years. And I know, like you said, that even some lawyers change their opinions over time because it really also depends on the perception of that particular historical moment. Now we have data. There's a company that I don't want to name, but there's a company that releases data that they collect from applicants, and they have thousands of cases. And so people are worried because they see that the cases with RFE are getting more, the cases with premium, they are getting more RFEs according to that data, but you don't know all the statistics behind that. So how statistically significant is that? I don't know, so I cannot come out here strongly and say, yes, this is surely is going to cause an RFE or not. I think we need to remind people also of several factors that go into selecting a premium processing or not, which is money. You know, it costs a lot of money to, and actually in March they're going to increase it, and then the category, right, Evan? Because it's not the same an EB1 than an EB2. In EB1, you are likely to be current now in the visa bulletin, and EB2, you have to wait anyway, right?
Right.
So,
yeah, no, there are a lot of variables to this, and in some ways, we even when you look at the statistics, if we knew for certain, what level of those cases were being denied without an RFE as well, I don't know that happens that often, but
right.
All I'm saying is there's a lot of variables that go into this, and that's why it's hard to know for sure. But I will say, from the time I was an officer, when your caseload is getting filled up, you start to think about, can I send out an RFE on any of these? And I think any of us would do that in that position. And so you really want to put the officer in the best position to say, well, there's no issues here that I really see need resolving, and so the harder you make it for them to issue an RFE, that hopefully puts you in that.
So maybe if you have a very strong case or a well put together case, you should be more prone to go for the premium processing than that. But of course, that's hard to gauge. What is these days, especially.
But there is something to that, because I have also, so I'm going to refer to something that probably won't make much sense here, but there's something called an Alford plea. This is an issue in criminal law, but it's basically somebody saying, okay, I'm not guilty of this offense, but it looks like I am, and so I'm just going to take the guilty plea. The example I'm trying to give with this is, there are some times that I've seen cases come together and just that the way the evidence is prepared, or there's some aspect of the case that triggers some thought in the officer that basically says, this evidence looks like you don't qualify. And so this probably doesn't happen that often. I've only suggested this to a few people, but in that case, I've said to those clients, because of these obstacles that you need, that are difficult for you to overcome, the very quick judgment that an officer is going to give in premium processing makes it better for you to file under regular processing. Hopefully that made sense. I know that example was kind of way out there, but that's just one thing I would add.
Right. And before we move on to the next topic, just a question, because you know USCIS quite well. So an officer that handles regular processing cases, do they also handle premium, or are we talking about a different subset of officers?
Yeah, a different subset of officers. Usually those handling premium processing are locked in on that case type. Now, there is a lot of cross-training that goes on. People will be trained to then move over to different branches. Just as when I was at the AAO, I was in certain branches and then moved to different case types as well.
Okay. That's interesting to know, because maybe as hopefully they do enough cross-training and moving people also from time to time, but that could justify that you could also see some differences in adjudication, perhaps.
Yeah, and one thing I would suggest with that is also, if you can take the approach that you may have a new officer, so that you just don't always assume that the officers know this case type backward and forward. And so you do want to lay out the requirements and the the descriptions and details from the policy manual and things like that to help the officer as well.
Good. That's a good comment, because usually I wouldn't do that, and now I know from an ex-USCIS officer that's a good idea. Good.
So the next questions are from high salary. Jonas asks, does high salary at X company act as a positive exceptional ability signal, or could an officer use it to argue that the person should stay at X company instead of self-petitioning?
Okay, it's a really good question. So, high salary is something that's very positive overall. When you look at whether the officer is going to almost use that against you to say, well, wait a second, why aren't they staying with the company that they're with? I don't necessarily think the officer will go that route. The officers know that there's a wide variety of reasoning. I mean, it could be something like maybe you're just not getting along with your colleagues at that business well enough, right? And you want some flexibility of being able to go out on your own and self-petition. But still, as you look at this, what you want to hone in on is the fact that you still do need to demonstrate that the labor certification is impractical, or it's just the national importance is so high that being approved for the EB2 NIW is better for the country overall.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully, yeah, that makes sense.
The next one is also for high salary, but for EB2, EB1A, sorry. What data sources are accepted by USCIS to compare with industry peers?
Okay, so I almost want to send you an email that just has the links that'll take you right there, because the one is not a very user-friendly. Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's this, you come to this page that gives you 4 options, and you're kind of confused at each 4 options. Do you want one location and multiple jobs and this type of thing? So Bureau of Labor Statistics is one. ONET Online is one that I use to kind of connect the dots to that, because that allows you to hone in on the SOC code that has the details that lines very well with your position. And oftentimes what you'll see on ONET Online is it'll say this data comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's usually the same figure. But on the Bureau of Labor Statistics page, you can go to a part that allows you to check for data in the who's in the 90th percentile, what that wage level is. You can find that on ONET Online as well. There's also the Career One Stop is one that it's in the policy manual. I don't love that one because it doesn't show the 90th percentile. It's just harder to use. But
especially for EB1.
Yeah, but those are basics. And then you can also include other data from Glassdoor, from a lot of these other things, to just kind of build a solid case of these are high numbers all the way around, and my salary is higher than that. And so, but the government specifies the Bureau of Labor Statistics for sure. So
So we have a question here about adjustment of status for a person that is living in the US, approved EB2 NIW, but wife and kids are living abroad. And the person asks, should I wait for the State Department or fill out the I-824, which I believe is to transfer the case to consular process? So we would need to know what they did in the I-140, right, to answer this.
Yeah, so you would need to let us know what was put on the petition, and
because if they let's assume that they selected adjustment of status for him, well, that's kind of irrelevant. But let's assume that they said that the family would apply abroad. They shouldn't have to file that form, right? That form is only to switch when you selected adjustment.
That's right. Yeah, and the other question that I'm just thinking of is there some concern that, is this country on the list that was just put out? Probably not. I think you would have
Yeah,
indicated
there's a lot of things we
that.
don't know, actually. Yeah.
But yeah, and the list of countries is at 75. Could that go up to 130? I don't know. So I would I would I would probably have a consultation with an attorney on this one. I mean, there's just a few other things that we'd like to understand just procedurally about the case.
Yeah.
So
We're in a very sensitive time also, so I think if you have doubts about your specific case and maybe it's a little bit complex because of your own visa status or because of the things that are happening every day in the news, maybe it's a good time to invest a little bit of money into a consultation, because otherwise nobody can really tell you what to do.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just say one other thing with this is I think it also is a little bit complex, because what we'd really need to do in a consultation is weigh out what are the benefits to you receiving adjustment of status for right now. For example, if your visa is only valid for a certain period of time and you need to make sure you're maintaining work authorization and transitioning to that, then that would make more sense to have you apply for adjustment of status now. And so, yeah, in essence, I would just say, having a consultation, you'll be able to discuss the full details of all of these things. We'd be able to talk about what are the age of the children, what, if some of them are approaching 21, how does that impact things? And so anyway, that's why I suggest we kind of go a little deeper there.
All right.
All right. So we have another questions for EB1. When officer reviewing EB1 cases, do you find expert support letters more helpful when they are very formal and legal style, or when they are straightforward and fact-driven? I think it's
clearly explaining.
Yes, clearly explaining the beneficiary's impact and significance. Which format works better in practice?
Okay, great question. I'm inclined to go with the ones that go right into what your impact and significance is. The formalities don't matter. Sometimes the formalities can actually make everything look so similar that the officers are just like, I don't know what to focus on. I don't see the exact description of what is it that this person is saying overall. So when I look at the petitions I prepare, I have gone away from doing the formality in a lot of ways, that sometimes I'll just do certain parts with bullet points where I'm saying this, look at these. You want to draw the officer to what is most important. The other thing I would mention is, if you do have those letters that have that formalistic view, and certainly we prepare a lot of cases that have that as well. Just make sure that you're highlighting things both in the cover letter that you're providing, as well as the letter. The officers are going to be looking at both, and by highlighting both, it really gives kind of a more clearer picture.
Mm-hmm. And another one about how to write things or how to present evidence. How does the length of the last, I guess the longevity maybe of the last evidence affect a petition, say applying in 2026 and the last piece of evidence is 2023? So there's a gap. That's what I understand from this question. How does USCIS see gaps in evidence?
Okay, good question. And I'm anticipating, because we're focused on EB2 NIWs, that this is an EB2 NIW case. I'll probably answer it both ways, just to be on the safe side. So with EB2 NIWs, it's not as big of a deal for that gap from 2023 to now. But if you are trying to show you're well positioned to carry out an endeavor, and everything you're referencing is from 10 years ago, that's going to be a lot more problematic. So you still want as much of the recent evidence as you can provide. But it's not like an EB1 case, which is imperative that you show the recency of the things that you've done, are continuing to show your recognition in the field, that you've risen to the top of the field and are maintaining that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And maybe we can go back quickly to, now that we enter the last minutes of the session, to the 75 country pause, which is making people anxious. So a couple of questions. Here is one about the chances of approval of an I-140. So if my I-140, so is there any effect of the ban of I-140? I guess that's the first question. And if approved, then what will be the next step?
Yeah, there isn't any ban towards approving the I-140, and the officer is not going to take that into account, especially because they know this could be lifted at any point. So yes, continue to go forward with I-140s or I-130s, whatever the petition is. What would be the next step is basically, just waiting to see what happens with the ban. Again, the underlying framework of this is trying to ensure that people have the means to support themselves. And so as you're able to present your case and show that that you do have that ability, you shouldn't have issues going forward when you get to that processing stage. The I-485 or I mean, green card processing in general does take quite a lot of time, and so you could get everything prepared, wait for the ban to be lifted and file, or you could file for the green card once the I-140 is approved. And there's, hopefully by the time the processing is moving forward at its natural course anyway, hopefully the ban is lifted and it just doesn't have any impact.
Yeah. And here is another one from a course member that says, this person got approved after an RFE, I know, and he says, how would double citizens be treated when they go to the consular processing if they have one citizenship affected by it and the other one is not affected? Can they expect more scrutiny even if they have that double citizenship?
They can expect scrutiny and that an officer will ask about it, but this raises a very interesting legal question that oftentimes there are issues that come about from these changes that the government officials didn't think about. And so I remember many times at the AAO where we would, along with our supervisors, say, how do we handle this? And we just say, I don't know, let's wait until we get some guidance. So with this, I would just basically point to, you're a citizen of this country. It's not on the list. You should be allowed to go through for processing. I do want to correct one thing I said earlier, because this ban is for people outside of the US, and I was referring to someone applying for the green card here in the US. So you can do that here. This is just a ban from those traveling abroad to come in.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we are talking about the 75 country as a ban. It's not really called a ban, it's a suspension or a pause, whatever you want to call it. But there are other two actions that were taken last year for, I think, a subset of those countries. I think there's some overlap in those lists. And in our website, we have a little tool where you can type the name of the country and it will tell you if it's affected by last year's travel ban and or by this suspension. And it gives you the links also to the official documents so people can read it and really understand, is adjustment of status affected or not? Because for the last year's actions, USCIS later issued a memo saying that they may pause adjustment of status for those countries, but not for the 75 country list that we know from January. So there's a lot of confusion, and I understand the confusion because there's so many things going on at the same time. So an attorney like Evan can clarify that in a individual consultation. And if you cannot afford that, then try to go to the official sources and read those instead of maybe going onto Reddit or other sources that may not be, you may find great people, but you never know who is behind the other screen, right? So it's really important to get the information straight from the source. Do we have any more questions?
We have a lot of them, yes.
But we have to wrap up. So maybe Marina, you can choose one question and then we'll wrap up and we'll leave Evan go.
So currently, the waiting time for EB2 NIW is 22 months. Do you think this will decrease or increase for other countries not in the pause?
Okay, it's a good question because there are aspects of this that by not processing individuals and by not counting those people against the numbers, that can affect the wait time. So and I apologize, my answers usually are not that helpful on this, because I say almost like, sometimes my wife says, well, what if this happens? And I say, well, what if it doesn't happen? So there's two ways to look at this. What I prefer is just try to find some positive things to move forward with this. And so, we'll be putting out some details soon about wait times and approval statistics and things like that. But what I would recommend is just try to move forward the best you can with the things that you can control, and then hopefully just these things pan themselves out. I don't anticipate that it would make such a big change, because I don't think it's going to take that much longer for the kind of the storm to blow over, as I had mentioned before. So, right. But I could be wrong in that it might take longer for that. So
right.
Anyway,
no,
I would.
But I think your advice is really good. Is look, there's things that we can control and things that we can't. All these news, the actions, temporary pauses, and all this we cannot control. We can follow and get the information and be aware of those. But that, like you said, that shouldn't stop you from preparing your I-140, engaging with a lawyer, or do-it-yourself route, whatever you choose. But move forward, because if you are just paralyzed by this, then you're also delaying your priority date. And in EB2, that's a costly mistake, because there's wait time waiting for you. So it's better that you establish it and you are in line there, so things can move forward in your case, right? Well, Evan, thank you so much. I want to close with this image, which is for anyone that is interested in hiring a lawyer. We have this partnership now with Manifest, where they will offer a discount and a free consultation, and you can follow that QR code, you can type that URL, or find it in the description of the video. And of course, if you want to do it yourself route, go to oscarsgreencard.com. But I want to thank Manifest, and I want to thank Evan, because you have spent more than an hour now with us, reviewing a case, answering a lot of questions. So thank you so much for your time.
Sure. It's great to be with you, and I appreciate all that you do.
Thank you. Thank you. And Marina, thank you for moderating as well.
Thank you.
And now we're saying bye. So see you next month with another live session.